Alright, so, episode 2. I've finished. Path of Destruction. First book in the Darth Bane series, which is where I decided to begin with my Legends reread. And before I get into the meat and potatoes of talking about this book, I just want to start by saying the whole point of this series was to basically see whether Legends was as good as I remember it being, because my memory is very foggy. It's been a long time since I've read pretty much anything in it from Legends. The only thing that I've read, I mentioned in the intro, really revisited, is the games pretty much. Specifically the KOTOR games, SWTOR. That's it really, because the KOTOR era is one of my favorite parts of Star Wars overall. But because of that, this seemed like a good place to start, and also the fact that it's basically all the way back at the start of the Legends continuity. So, I think I'll start with just an overall quick whether I liked this book or not. I did. I can confirm Legends are off to a good start. This is a very good book. By no means perfect. I do have problems with it, but I'll get into those later. But for the most part, the quality of the things that actually mattered in this book, in my opinion, were much higher than the current, generally at least, the current level of quality of current canon. This is just my opinion, of course, but obviously I'll get into more detail about why I think what I think. But yeah, I suppose that's the intro out of the way. That's pretty much all I have to say for the general overview. It's a good book. I recommend it. It's not too long. I will say though, if you're gonna get these books, there are two ways you can get them. So as you can see here, I have the Disney. I have the one that's this cover, and the reason I bought this one is because the art was really good. Now, fortunately, I really liked the art on the front. Fortunately, it turned out the second one in the series with this art on, which looks really nice, wasn't available because the quality of this paperback is absolutely awful. As you can see, that's two fingers. I'm not even really trying. This book it's literally like a piece of it's awful. The quality of this paperback. I don't recommend you buy this. I recommend you go and you grab the older covers because these are much smaller, much more robust. They will stand the test of time, and I don't think this book will last 10 years. I'll be real. Like I left this book in my bag, and it kind of bent like this, and it took like a whole week of a whole well, not a whole week, but like a significant portion of a week leaving it under a weighted book. I left it under one of my tabletop Vampire the Masquerade 20th edition books, which, if you know what that is a pretty big book. On top of this, to flatten it back out, and it's still not fully flattened back out. It's still naturally curved. I mean, you can't really see because obviously it's kind of there. You go, you can see a bit there, but just thought I'd point that out just in case anyone is interested in buying these books after watching this video, if anyone watches this video. Although the art is far superior on the front of these books, it is a lot nicer. I'll show you an example of why, because one of the covers on the other one I have is pretty bad. I'll grab it now. Alright, so here's one of the older covers. I'm not sure who it's by, and I'm not sure who it's published by. I think this is Penguin, but I don't know if you can see it. You can't see it because my fucking webcam's terrible. But the art on this is, I'll be honest, pretty typical for the time period when this cover was probably made. But by the sounds of today, not that art on book covers is really important. Like, really doesn't matter, but it's nice to have a nice looking book that looks nice on your shelf. At the end of the day, the spine's alright. So, I suppose that's what matters the most. But like they say, don't judge a book by its cover. This is a superior, just more robust novel. I can't bend it like I can the other one. So just take that into consideration. I just thought I'd put that in since it's something that I noticed about these books in general. Right, so I suppose I ought to start with the things I thought were good about this book. So the way that I'm going to do this is I think I'll go through the things that are good, things that are bad, and then, well, things that I thought were good, I thought were bad, and the things that I thought could kind of go either way, were kind of, things that, elements I didn't like and elements I did. So the first thing to mention, really, um, about this book, I'll preface what I'm about to say about things about this book by saying kind of how I view quality of fiction generally. And the way that I try to do that usually is I try to kind of think of what the goal of the fiction was, because people can get caught up in criticizing irrelevant things that really don't have anything to do with what was really the point of the fiction. And in the case of this book, Path of Destruction, this is an origin story of Bane, who's an important character in the lore, and the whole thing is a character piece. It's all about Bane. Nothing else really matters. And in my opinion, and with that in consideration, I think this is a really, really good book because Bane's character arc in this book, I think, is very well done, and Bane is a pretty great character in this book. Now he's by no means the most incredible, nuanced, multi-dimensional character that's ever existed. He has depth. He definitely has depth. And he does have an interesting character arc that is compelling. Um, but like most Sith, because of the nature of the dark side of the Force, by the end of the book, he is just kind of babying evil, and that's just kind of how it is. I mean, let's be honest. You know, Anakin did Order 66, killed the younglings. Bane basically does shit just like that in this book. So there's that to consider. But obviously, you know what you're getting into. If you're going to read a Star Wars book about a Sith, you're not going to read it if you don't like that. So I think a lot of the stuff that flies in this book wouldn't necessarily fly in other books without the backing of all of the other Star Wars media to really get you to understand that being controlled by the dark side of the Force makes you do some pretty evil shit. Makes you become pretty fucking evil. Um, Turns you into a monster. Is what it does. And that's really what's so great about this book is Bane's slow, reluctant descent into becoming a monster, and the way in which the Star Wars universe really beats him down, and really forces him into a situation where he has two choices. He can survive in a life of servitude and despair, or he can thrive as a monster, as a Sith Lord, and the only way he can really achieve that is by systematically destroying his own humanity. And that's really the core of what makes this character arc so compelling to me. And I'll go into some more detail on that, but I want to give a quick overview of kind of Bane's character arc. I do want to say, from now on, we are going to be talking spoilers. I could go into detail. I could try and do a thing where I kind of try and skirt around the finer points of the story. And I could try and do a no spoiler kind of thing at the start, but I don't really see the point of doing that because I can't really get into the point of why I like this book without saying anything specific. So, well, maybe people that are better at making YouTube videos than me can do that, but I don't think I would be able to. So, if you don't want any spoilers at this point in the video, I would say stop watching. And I'm going to give you well, not at this point, but I'm going to give you a quick kind of vague idea of this book. So, this book is about a guy who's a miner. He's mining cortosis. Now, cortosis is a material in the Star Wars universe that is extremely inconsistent in its presentation. It's always been a flaw. It's kind of like the kryptonite of Star Wars. For some reason, sometimes it's really rare, sometimes it's not. In the KOTOR era, this shit was common as hell. It was put in everything, from every single vibroblade to every single piece of armor to every single ship hull. Now, not to say that armor in the KOTOR era could deflect a lightsaber, which is what cortosis is known for, but it was woven into armor to make them lightsaber resistant, to make it so that you can just cut through somebody in half, kill them straight away. And the reason for this is basically to explain why when you have a lightsaber in a numbers based RPG like KOTOR, you can hit a guy with a lightsaber and he doesn't die in one hit. And for the most part, that flies, I would say. Same with vibroblades. When you fight people in KOTOR with a lightsaber, you do cross blades with people who have vibroblades, and that does make sense because they are made of. There's a high cortosis purity in the make of the weapon, and obviously I don't know why it's put in ship hulls. That might be a thing that continued further into Legends, but basically it's put in everything in the KOTOR era, and um, this is a this is basically where our main character, Dessel, who is what Bane was known as before he became Bane. So basically, the way it begins is he's basically mining, and he gets attacked by somebody in the mines who basically wants to kill him pretty much. I won't go into too much detail. And basically he gets banned. He gets basically kicked out of the mine by the company he works for. They're like, right, you get 5 days no pay. Bane's goal, or I should say Dassel's goal at this point in the story, is to get the hell off of Apartos, which is, I think that's what it's called. Yes, this crappy moon, which the only value of this planet is to mine cortosis. And he's stuck there. He was born there, and he inherited his father's debt, and he has to find a way to escape. The only way he knows how is to pay off his debt fairly. But with 5 days without pay, that's going to eat into his debt. He's going to have to get further in debt to pay his rent and all his living costs. So he decides, actually, you know what? I'm not going to do that. I'm actually going to continue to make credits. So he goes to the cantina and he starts to play some card games with some Republic soldiers who are there. Long story short, this doesn't go well. Bane gets involved in a political discussion with the Republic soldiers. It doesn't go well. He angers them by basically making the argument that the Sith aren't as, from the point of view of the people in the Outer Rim, or at least people like him who are just stuck on a moon and aren't involved in the war. The Sith really don't seem as bad as that bad compared to the Republic, because the Republic is flawed and pretty crap in its own way. And they begin to fight pretty much. Bane almost causes a riot that gets all the soldiers killed with his arguing and his burgeoning force powers. Bane accidentally basically incites anger in everyone around him through his innate use of the force, considering he's quite strong in the force, obviously. And at this point, he's kind of starting to kind of experience his powers a little bit. I won't go into detail with at this point how. And basically afterwards he leaves and the Republic soldiers attack him in an alleyway and they basically try to beat him up. Now Bane's winning this fight against the Republic soldiers in a fist fight, and one of them panics and pulls out a vibroblade and tries to stab Bane. And Bane grabs the vibroblade, turns it around and kills one of the Republic soldiers with it in self-defense. Um, and the Republic soldiers run off, and they're going to tell their superior. And unfortunately for Bane, the company he works for values the credits from the Cortosis mines that they get from selling to the Republic more than him. So unfortunately, they're going to throw him under the bus to keep the Republic happy, so he'll keep buying their Cortosis. So he stands no chance. He'll basically get executed for murder. Uh, so he basically has no choice. He joins the Sith army and he leaves, and that's the beginning. And I won't go into any more detail. That's basically the first 4 chapters. And it's pretty great from that point on, and I recommend you read it. Now, I'm officially going to be leaving the no spoilerish territory and going into detail about what I really liked about Bane, what I really liked about his character arc, and what I just really liked about this book. But we'll start with Bane because this book is about Bane, and he's the heart and soul of this book, and he is what makes it good, in my opinion. So, Bane. Dessel, rather. He's certainly, from the beginning of the book, not necessarily a good person, but he's not a bad person either. He's a guy who's in a shitty situation, and he's making the best of it. He doesn't want to hurt anyone. He just wants to mine his Cortosis. He just wants to pay off his debt. He just wants to leave. Now, in the very first scene, we are shown that he has a level of precognition that basically any Force user has, pretty much. When he gets in a fight with this guy, he wins the fight because of his precognition, and he would have lost the fight without it, quite severely actually. And then Bane leaves, and obviously he gets involved in this card game. This brings me to the first thing that I really, really liked about Bane's character, and that's that we're shown very early in, even though he's a Cortosis miner, through him playing a card game with the Republic soldiers. A lot about Bane's character is revealed to us through show don't tell, and it's done very well. Um, and Bane's main thing that makes him a badass isn't that he's big, isn't that he's strong, isn't that he's naturally gifted in the dark side of the Force. No, it's that he's cunning and that he's ruthless, and he needs to be. And in this card game, he basically manipulates the Republic soldiers and the entire game to win a massive pot of 10,000 credits. And the way that it's done is very good. I personally found this chapter of the book to be completely and utterly enthralling. I could not put the book down at this point. And it really kind of the early chapters delve into kind of the nature of his character, his strengths, his weaknesses, whether he's a good person or a bad person, because Bane's certainly not a bad person. He's not a good person, but he's kind of an average guy. Bane at the start of these books could have gone either way, probably. Could have been a force for good in the galaxy, or could have been a force for bad in the galaxy. Unfortunately, like I previously mentioned, he runs into some misfortune, some injustice that he just cannot overcome. Unfortunately, the galaxy just simply is gonna eat him, chew him, spit him out, shit him out, whatever. It's not gonna. It doesn't give a shit about him. The Republic don't give a shit about him. The Republic soldiers who tried to kill him certainly don't give a shit about him, and the Republic only really probably give a shit about the opinion of their soldiers. So Bane really has no choice. He runs into a situation where he has no choice. He has to join the Sith. He doesn't want to be a soldier and he doesn't want to kill anyone. But at that point, it's kill or be killed. So he really has no choice. So Bane joins the Sith army. Not the Brotherhood of Darkness, which is at this point the Sith Order that was controlling the Sith Rebellion. Of course, in KOTOR, the Sith refers generally to the hierarchical society, which is controlled by the Sith at the top, and then anyone who works for them is like referred to as Sith. But yeah, basically he makes his way to we have a time skip at this point. It skips about 12 months into the future, and again we're shown more of Bane's kind of positive character traits. When basically he finds himself to be quite a successful soldier, in no small part due to the natural precognition he has, the natural powers that being so strong in the Force grants him. And he does quite well for himself for the first 12 months. I won't go into detail, but he, at this point, he's a leader, he's looked up to, he has friends, he has soldiers he has camaraderie with, who he cares about, who really cares about. He cares about them enough to knock his superior officer out and put his life on the line, considering Sith don't like insubordination at all for his soldiers. So at this point, Bane's definitely capable of selflessness. He's definitely capable of being good. He's by no means a bad person at this point in the story. But basically, he forces a military operation. It goes well. He loses 9 soldiers, but that's basically the best he could have ever asked for. And he eventually gets captured by Sith Inquisitors for his insubordination and put into a pit. And a Sith comes over. His name, I'll be honest, I cannot remember. I'll get back to remembering the names of characters later on. This is one of the bad things about the works, in my opinion. And basically, he gets asked to join. Well, gets taken to the to Korriban, where he gets asked by a Sith Lord whether or not he wants to become Sith because he's naturally strong in Force. And this is really good scene where he gets asked, pretty much, gets told the kind of ideology of the Sith, the whole, the weak feed the strong ideology that the Sith have, and unfortunately for Bane, and the whole idea of like you can only trust your own power to be safe and to succeed and to live in the galaxy, and obviously the Sith ideology is flawed. It's a bad ideology. Any healthy human being would not see the world that way. But unfortunately for Bane, he has been continuously fucked over by trying to do the right thing, and by just being himself, and just by living, and just by trying to pay off his debts. And at this point, he's pretty sick of it. When he gets captured by the Sith, there's this part where all of the soldiers who are loyal to him all get ready to pull their blasters out and basically go full rogue to save him. And he tells them to stand down and allows himself to be arrested because they would have tried to save him, but they would have died if they'd attempted to. And Bane goes through the realization that all the people who've helped him up to this point, all the things that's happened throughout his life up to this point, at every turning point for the most part, the only person he could rely on himself, he could rely on to survive, was himself. Because if he'd allowed them to try and save him, they would have all died. It would have been useless, and he would have died too. And it's really hard to argue with Bane becoming susceptible to the Sith ideology at this point because he's been screwed over so many times and so significantly by the galaxy that you can really see why he feels the way he does and why he's so willing to accept it. And he agrees to begin his Sith training. And this is where he begins to descend, but also where he becomes the most interesting. I won't spoil too much about this for anyone, because quite frankly, this is the best part of the book. But I will quickly, basically, go over why this part of the book where he's at the Sith Academy for me really made this book for me, and why I love his character arc so much. Because there's a bit there's a part where he fights an acolyte and he kills them using the Force. He Force crushes them to death, and he gets a taste of what it's like to give yourself over to the dark side, and it fucking terrifies him. It scares him so much that he cannot use the Force for 3 months, I believe it was. It might be 3 weeks, but it's a while. He just can't use the Force anymore. And that was a really cool character moment. And that was the backbone for him being more continuing to be interesting throughout his fall to the dark side, because that's the point where Bane has to make a decision, accept his fear and the guilt that is stopping him from being able to tap into the dark side, because Bane feels a lot of guilt about what he did. He feels bad about it. Thing is, up to this point, Bane had never killed anyone out of anything other than self-preservation. But he didn't need to kill this acolyte. He'd beaten him in a fight, but he gave in to the dark side and killed him anyway. Just because he could, pretty much. And it scared him so much. And that was just such a human reaction to the dark side and to the use of the dark side that you don't really see very often in Star Wars media. Usually they just kind of like, they're like, oh yeah, it's great. I tapped into the dark side and it was great. I loved it. And they just kind of immediately spiral. But Bane didn't. He didn't immediately spiral. He resists it for a while. He resists it until he realizes that he has to. He has a choice. He has to continue to be weak and not be able to use the Force, or he will have to get over his fear, destroy his guilt, his natural human feeling at killing someone, destroy it, crush it, purge it from his psyche, pretty much, and but deliberately become a monster to survive. And it's quite. I've personally found it quite harrowing to read. I really did feel for Bane because, for the most part, he it's really not his fault that he's in the situation he's in. It's a pretty shitty situation. It's a shit sandwich situation, and although by the end, he's certainly so far gone that you can no longer empathize with him, and you can no longer um, agree with him, um, or really even root for him anymore. But it was that period where you could, that really made this book great, in my opinion. And that part of the book, which is the second part of the book, the middle section, um, was really great, because usually the middle section of books is the meandering part, is the part where a lot of novels suffer from the meandering middle, which is when not enough happens in the middle. There's not enough plot momentum. But for me, I just couldn't stop reading, and I finished this book in 3 days. So, uh, yeah, that's basically the most important thing that I wanted to go over. Um, Bane's Bane's character arc, really. Bane's character arc in this book. It's great. I loved it. I thought it was much better than a lot of the stuff we've got going on at the moment in New Canon, unfortunately. Um, and I thought it was great. So, for that alone, I recommend you read this. But I do want to go on to talk about some of the other things I thought were good that were kind of unrelated to Bane as a character. And the reason I wanted to go into Bane as a character to start off with, because I really think that's what this book is about, and everything else is pretty much irrelevant. There's a lot of stuff in this book, unfortunately, that is just like background exposition that just isn't relevant to Bane as a character, and I will go into that in the bad section. But all the Bane stuff is great. It really is. Um, and that's why I recommend you read this book. Why I loved it. Things that I thought were great, um, specifically about the plot and the book. Just general things that are great. I'll kind of fire them off now, things that I thought were really cool. So, the way that Bane was to realize that the rule of two is necessary was really interesting and really well done. Um, I thought the realization that the Sith will always kill each other, that they will always, their culture will always break down into infighting because their greatest strength, which was their desire for power, was also their greatest weakness. Um, and the realization was very well done. It definitely didn't take a backseat to Bane's character arc, um, although it doesn't really happen until the last third of the book. Um, at which point, obviously, Bane decides that he's going to purge all of the current, well, the Dark Brotherhood, which were all of the Sith at the time, led by Cont, who was a Sith who was basically using the Force to manipulate the emotions of the other Sith to force them into like some kind of weird amalgamation between the Sith as we know them throughout most of Star Wars continuity and the Jedi as like an order. But it was completely false. It was only because he had a natural talent with manipulating the emotions of the other Sith that he was able to maintain a veneer, uh, a falsehood, a facade of cooperation. Um, and really, Bane basically completely and utterly tricks them into killing themselves, suicide bombing themselves. It's very well done. Uh, you can read that yourself. I thought that was pretty cool. I thought that was pretty well done. I thought there was some pretty neat world building, specifically in the first third of the book, right at the start when he was still on Patros, which was specifically the way that the whole thing was just thinly veiled financial slavery. The way in which it's continuously mentioned at every single possible point where they can financially screw you over. They do, you know, they control the rent. They control the rent specifically so that you can't really get out of debt. They control the rent, so they control prices at the cantina so that things aren't too cheap. Uh, any money that you make past 10,000 credits when you're gambling goes straight to the company. Um, the fact that the wages are like really heavily doctored so that they can't really get too wealthy, they can't really escape. The whole thing was really well written, was really well presented to the reader. Um, the perpetual debt and the economic slavery and the Outer Rim dystopia is really something that I think new canon is kind of missing. The Mandalorian In the Mandalorian, we spend a lot of time on the Outer Rim. And it's never really shown how shit it is, how terrible it is. Um, Normally in favor of an adventurous tone, um, but at least in the Old Republic era, um, especially with the Zerka Corporation and stuff like that, there was a lot of like uh, capitalist hell, outer rim stuff going on that was really really fun, really cool from a world building perspective. And this book is no exception. This book does have that. If you really like that about the Old Republic era, you like it here. One of the best parts of the book for me was in chapter 3, and specifically this is pages 40 and 41, where Dessel basically goes on a political rant to the Republic soldiers about why the average person in the Outer Rim prefers the Sith to the Republic. And he points out the Republic's hypocrisy, their corruption, in what was kind of a brilliant bit of political world building that introduced a lot of nuance to the Jedi versus Sith conflict through the extension of the Republic versus Imperial conflict and the societies that they decide to align themselves to. Um, and this is something that I think that is sorely missing in new canon compared to what was kind of the norm. and Legends. Um, I really feel like this part of the book, the political back and forth between the miners and the Republic soldiers. It was a brilliant way to show how cunning and intelligent Bane really is, despite the fact that he was a humble miner. But it has shows a shadow of a lot of the political nuances that were going on in Legends, specifically in this era, that just just are completely missing, really, in the new canon. Well, not completely, actually. To be fair, there was that one scene in the Mandalorian where they capture the Imperials on the ship when they're trying to get um, onto the ship to take Grogu back from Moff Gideon, and the Imperials on the ship are arguing that um, the rebels were actually terrorists and arguing on the basis of all the innocent people they killed in the Death Star, which was a thing in Legends, was a point that was brought up quite a few times to my memory in some of the books. And, you can understand why someone would see that as an act of terror, considering, yeah, okay, the Death Star was full of stormtroopers and Imperial soldiers, but it was also full of engineers, people who were in the logistics, all sorts of average Joes who just had a job. And, you know, apart from that one scene in Mandalorian, I really don't. I really think Disney are missing a shot with kind of the political nuances of the world, and I think that's something that they definitely need to improve if they want to really be on the level that Legends was at from a world building perspective, at least. Um, and this book has that at the start, and has it somewhat later on as well. And there are some parts where the Jedi are shown to not really be as perfect as they're presented to be usually. Um, but that's something that I thought was really great about this book. Another thing, um, the slow ramp up of Bane's burgeoning force sensitivity and the various innate powers he has early in were really well done, um, in my opinion. And there were some really cool scenes, um, like when he's using his precognition and mixed with his cunning to win this game of cards at the start. When he gets attacked in a dark alleyway by a vibroblade, and for some reason he can see it in the dark, like like it's glowing, like it's crystal clear, even though he can't see anything else. And this is part in the one of the chapters when he's a soldier in the Sith army, and someone throws a flashbang at him basically, and he basically closes his eyes and he pulls out a sniper rifle and he snipes 8 people in 3 seconds. Uh, despite the fact that he's flashbanged, um, and the fact that he accidentally almost causes a riot. Um, and the presentation of this was very well done. It's never like telling you too heavily. The only thing that it really tells you about is the precognition. Like when he accidentally incites a riot, um, well, the beginning of one anyway. It's not directly told you that's what's happening. It's implied, and it's a possible interpretation of the text. Um, but then obviously it's not until someone says afterwards, like, I could feel the hatred emanating off of you, that it's really necessarily completely clear to the reader. Um, of course, some people are reading it might clock onto that earlier. I did, but some people might not. So, it's one of those things that is a good mix of show don't tell. It's told to you, but in a realistic fashion, while also being shown to you before it's mentioned. Um, which I think is generally a very good way to mix the two. Um, in a way that feels authentic. Uh, yeah, that was a highlight for the book for me. A minor thing, uh, that is something that really annoys me about new canon compared to Legends, and this book kind of exemplifies it a bit. And there's a dedication in this book to never referring to common objects like they're referred in real life. Like a clock is only ever referred to as a chrono. Monitors and televisions are always referred to as vid screens. It makes the world feel more lived in and authentic. Um, a problem I have with the new canon compared to this is something that is a bit of a minor gripe, but it is something that does annoy me, and it's things like borrowing too much from the real world. Because in Legends, Star Wars was like so very distinct on every level, on a really deep level from our reality. Um, from down to the fact that clocks aren't even called clocks. Um, the biggest example for me of this flaw is the fact that in Legends, every single creature that is like, say, for example, a bantha or a rancor or a cat hound or a rhinoc or whatever, minoc, sorry, um, is distinct and not something that exists in the real world at all by any stretch of the imagination, right? Cats don't exist in Star Wars, and there's something that new canon really keeps messing up, in my opinion. I mean, straight up horses in the third film, not third film, sorry, the ninth film was cringe and silly and lazy, quite frankly. They could have at least made a sci-fi horse, but they didn't even bother to do that. I want to clarify something I said here about space horses. I actually went and double checked this after I made the video. This is completely false. This is just me misremembering something that just is not the case. Um, the horses in the ninth film are not horses. They're not literally just horses in space. They're called Orbaks, and they actually aren't completely one to one with a horse. I do still stand by the point that I think they do just look like horses to me, and it actually because I never looked into it, I probably would never have really noticed. My memory is clearly fuzzy on that film. Um, even though it came out recently. But I think you know it's. I have to clarify it. I have to be honest. Like I said, I'd be 100% honest. Um, I was just wrong here. This is just false. I would cut it out, but it seems disingenuous. I'll just add this in with me clarifying. They were not space horses. Um, they simply looked like horses because I believe they used the horses as a basis for the CG, and then they probably like, edited their faces or something. When I was looking into it, I did find a picture of some of the actors on horseback. Um, yeah, mostly they look very similar to horses, but they're actually not. I did say they could have at least made a sci-fi horse. Well, that's what they did. They did actually make a sci-fi horse, so I was wrong. I just wanted to clarify that. Um, Lots of animals that you see in the background in the new series, TV shows, like in The Mandalorian, where it's just straight. I can't remember what episode it is, but it's just frogs everywhere. It's just some random planet, and it's like, why are there frogs? This is just messing with my immersion a little bit. I mean, it would have been jarring enough if it was a sci-fi setting set in our galaxy, and there happened to be a frog on a random jungle planet that they landed on. But this is supposed to be another fucking galaxy, and this is something that really annoys me with new canon. It's not a big deal, but it is a gripe, and it's just I think another example of the level of effort, the level of attention to detail that was the norm for Legends, and they just can't be bothered to do for new canon. Yeah, sure, it is. I suppose perfectionism. It is not necessary for uh, the stories to be good. It's definitely not. Um, but it's a nice bit of world building that would have been great if they continued it on into into the new canon. And even in this book, there's some creatures that I mentioned, like the bouncers, which are like these force sensitive psychic balloons of air. Um, and they're pretty. I mean, they're not that big of a deal, but they're kind of cool. Like they can heal people and stuff like that. They can well, it's kind of implied they might be able to. They can um kind of change the thoughts of the people around them, stuff like that. And then when the force the thought bomb goes off, it kind of sends a bunch of them insane, which obviously is what leads creates Darth in the end. But yeah, that's just another thing I wanted to mention. I think that's all the stuff I want to mention that I really liked about this book. Remember, this is just the one book. There's a whole trilogy to go yet. So I think that'll be it for the stuff that I liked. And now I'll go on to I think I'll go on to the in-between stuff, the stuff that could go either way. For me at least. So for things that are kind of in between, I want to start off with the time skips. There's a lot of time skips in this book. They can be a bit jarring, I think. Now, obviously, I think the reason I consider this to be an in between kind of either way issue is because I think it can be forgiven on the basis that this is one book, it's 300 pages long, there needs to be some brevity, things need to get to the point, and uh, Bane was a soldier for 1 year, and the biggest, most jarring time skip for me is when Bane gets smuggled off of Patros and ends up in the Sith Army, and it's 12 months later. It wasn't a big deal. When I read 12 months later, I was like, Jesus. In the end, it turned out to not be a big deal. But the problem with it in this specific part of the book is the book jumps forward to Bane having a bunch of pre-existing relationships with a bunch of characters. Well, not a bunch, a couple of characters, and these characters, we didn't really know anything about them. They're just soldiers. It would have been nice to see Bane's kind of kind of relationship with them grow a little bit, even if it was just a couple of chapters, even if it was just another 30 pages in the book. I think it would have been nice to see that. But I can imagine it was probably already in the book, but it got cut. But it's not a big deal. It's not definitely an either way issue. But it's just something that I think would have been nice to see. Would have been nice to see a bit more Bane as a normal guy before he became a Sith. Before he began his Force training. Again, not too much of a big deal, but something that I did find a bit jarring, in my opinion. My next point kind of continues on from me mentioning the side characters. The side characters are definitely a big weakness, in my opinion, in this book. Even the most fleshed out of them, which I would say would be Githany, and Khan, and Hoth, I suppose, are all quite weak characters. Githany I thought was alright. Khan I thought was a very passable villain. He's certainly a better villain than most of the villains in like the Clone Wars arcs and stuff like that, in my opinion, by quite a large margin. But I still thought it was a very mediocre villain. Kind of a pushover. His motivations are never really explained. His origins aren't explained, and most of the characters who aren't Bane in this book are very one-dimensional, and they're just obstacles for Bane to overcome. Now, personally, for me, a great cast of characters is really important for my enjoyment for any story. One of my favorite series of books is a series of books called the Dresden Files, and the reason I love those books is the characters. The characters are what keep bringing me back every time, along with the world. Obviously, I'm reading a Star Wars book. I already know I like the world, so this really is, apart from Bane, it really is missing the character element. But the reason that would be a pretty that would be like a pretty big bad no-no for me. The reason that I think it's fine in this book is because the characters exist to basically push the story forward, to push Bane's character forward, who is the heart of this book. Everything that happens because of Bane. Everything that happens, the world in this book revolves around Bane. Bane is the most important character, and as obstacles and beings to further Bane's development as a character, they actually are fine. If you think of the characters from that perspective, I think the characters are actually good if that's the goal, the narrative goal for them being within the book at all. Um, but I think, yeah, the characters in these books that aren't Bane are very weak. Um, and I'll go into a reason for that later in the bad section, which I'm about to go on. I think this is pretty much everything I want to say for the in between, the kind of either way stuff. Um, and now I'm going to go on to stuff about the book that I did not think was good. Okay, so the bad. I'm going to go into the bad stuff, the stuff that I just think are the flaws of these books. That I really think there's not really any excuse for these elements being as poor as they are, or stuff that I just didn't enjoy about it. Um, and I'll start by saying the main issue that I had with this book is all of the parts of the book that aren't from Bane's or Githany's perspective. I found them to be quite boring, and they provided some much needed context for the overall plot of the book. They definitely did. But at the end of the day, I couldn't really care less for any of the side characters that weren't Bane, Githany, Hoth, or Khan. Even then, I don't care about Hoth and I don't care about Khan. I just recognize their importance to the plot. Um, Githany was fine, uh, but I just she was interesting in the role she played in Bane's life, but as an individual character, as a standalone character, I mean, really, what is it to say about her? Nothing. She was just boring. Again, no, again, this brings me back to the whole idea of how I view this book to be that um, everything that doesn't feed into Bane's character is pointless, and this is kind of one of my problems with some of the stuff that was going on. It just existed as exposition through the viewpoint of characters I didn't care about. And although I understand that some people did care about the overall events going on, the overall events going on in the galaxy at this point in the Star Wars lore, in my opinion, weren't that interesting. Bane was the only interesting thing that was going on that was presented to me in this book so far. Of course, I'm only on the first book, but in this book, everything that wasn't Bane was was not great. And I would say about a third of this book is from someone's perspective other than Bane. So if a third of your book is a bit boring, that is a pretty big negative. Now, of course, this is just my opinion. Some people might love them. They're not terrible chapters or anything. They're not terrible sections of the book. I just didn't think they were as nearly on the level of the stuff that's from Bane's perspective. Um, and I suppose it's not that big of a deal, but I really just can't ignore it. I can't just not mention it. Um, really, Bane is what makes this book good on every level for me, and because of that, the other characters just were not snuff, unfortunately. And this kind of feeds into my second big problem. My only other really big problem with this book, and that I know a lot of people probably won't care about this, but I do. The prose is quite boring. The actual writing, the actual way that things are told, uh, for those of you who don't know what prose means, the sentences aren't broken up enough. There's not a mixture of short and snappy sentences. It's not. It can be quite boring to read. It can kind of be. I would like to compare it to Harry Potter in terms of like the prose. It's kind of like those books had a wording that was kind of like the reading equivalent of eating cardboard. It was kind of a kind of boring to read. And if it weren't for the events that were going on being so interesting, the the read itself wouldn't have been that great. And this is a problem that I had with this book, and specifically the biggest problem I had with the prose was the complete lack of description. Um, Many of the characters were not described in any way other than their race, um, to my memory from just reading this book. I have just finished reading it, so it's quite recent in my memory, and I do not have a clear memory of a lot of the descriptions. And I have an example here of how jarring some of the descriptions can be. Because at the start, right at the start, actually, in the prologue, um, Khan is speaking to two characters, right? One is a Twi'lek and one is a human. They are somewhat described. The human is described as tall and gaunt, and having pale skin. But when he talks to one of them, they're mentioned. So it's mentioned there's a Twi'lek, and it's mentioned there is a human, and then he speaks to one of them based on their name. It says he turns to the character based on their name, and their name is mentioned. I can't remember his name now. Hang on. Let me get it up. It's right at the start here. Yeah, Cordis and Kopecz. I think that's how you say it. I'm not sure how you say his name. It's Kopecz. I'm not sure how you say it. Um, yeah, one human and the other Twi'lek. You recognize them despite the darkness. Cordis and Kopecz, both powerful Sith lords. He approached them quickly, smiling. It says, Cordis, tall, so lean as to appear almost skeletal, smiled back. This is a great victory, Lord Khan. It has been far too long since the Sith had an academy in Korriban. Which one is he? Is he the is he the Twi'lek, or is he the human? Why is he described by his features? That could be the Twi'lek or the human. And it's not until about halfway down the page that it's clear which one is which. So it's kind of hard to visualize the scene because it's not until I'm reading it now. It's not until it says that Khan clasps a hand on the hefty Twi'lek's shoulder, and even then it's not clear whether it's which one it is he's touching. Again, because there's a disjoint, there's a complete the the appearance of these characters and their races are not mentioned near each other in the text or in the same sentence. It's so it's not clear which one's which. And then it's not until it says Khan clasps a hand on the hefty Twi'lek's shoulder. This is a great victory for us, he said. Korriban is more than just another world, it's a symbol, the birthplace of the Sith. This victory sends a message to the Republic and the Jedi. Now they will truly know the fit to fear the Brotherhood. And then Kopecz, you know what I'm going to call him? Kopecz, the weapon. Fuck it. Shrugged free of Khan's hand. Oh, so he's the Twi'lek because he just put his hand on the Twi'lek's shoulder and now is being mentioned by name. And this is kind of a theme throughout the books. That other characters who just are kind of important but not described, and it throws off the mind's eye for visualization. Not all characters need to be described, but some of the named characters, Dessel's superior officer, Ulabor, I think he's called. He's not described. His voice is mentioned to be shrill, but that's it. There's a sniper in Dessel's unit called Lucia. She has multiple lines. She speaks a lot. She's present throughout the whole chapter. We don't even get told her height, her skin color, not even her hair color, which is quite jarring, in my opinion. They could have at least given these side characters a one-lined, memorable character trait to imagine them by, like maybe like wearing their cap backwards, at least something. Um, and it that was really jarring for me. The description in these books is not great. Again, Bane's lightsaber is described as having a hooked end, and that's it. And that's all we know about its appearance. Um, Bane, on the other hand, through other people's comments, is continuously described, which kind of brings me back to another point of, you know, Bane really is the best thing about this book. Everything feeds into all. It feels like all the effort was put into him, and that does make sense. But there really needed to be some more description for me. Um, even at the end when Darth Zana is introduced, who is one of the most important characters for the rest of the trilogy, her appearance isn't described um, because it's from her perspective. Um, well, is it? I don't remember. Um, no, yeah, her appearance isn't described either, and this is just bizarre to me. I understand over describing things. You don't want to end up like Tolkien, where you're just describing every little thing, but incessantly. But there's definitely a balance to that, and I personally found it hard to visualize a lot of the characters and the situations because there just wasn't any description at all. In a lot of ways, it just was really jarring to me. Maybe that's just because I do writing as a hobby, and um, I think that that's important. But maybe that's just my tastes. Um, but I personally thought that to be a pretty big negative. I don't like verbose description either, but I do like um, bare minimum amount. Another problem I had was during the dialogue. A lot of the time, the characters aren't their like emotional reactions, their facial expressions aren't described. Um, the author, think it's Carpathian it's pronounced. Um, he doesn't describe a lot of things that a lot of authors. A really good author can weave um, lots of little descriptors about someone's facial expression to really elevate um, the prose and to elevate the description. And that's just not the case here, unfortunately. Some people they might not care about that, but for me, um, that was a pretty big flaw of the books. And I can go without mentioning it if I'm gonna, like I said, I'm gonna be completely honest about all of these books that I'm gonna read. And if I notice something that I think is bad, I will point out and I'll be completely honest about it. And that's what I'm doing here. I really thought the description was the prose and the description, the general writing, um, not from the perspective of the plot or anything like that, just the prose was quite poor. Um, like a 2 stars out of 5 stars level of poor. Um, but it is what it is. No book can be perfect at the end of the day. Um, overall, final thoughts on this book. Um, you should go read it. If you like Star Wars, I think it's great. Um, for the most part, like I said, it does have problems, but overall, pretty damn good. I did not remember Bane being as interesting of a character as he is. I was quite surprised that I enjoyed this book as much as I did. To my memory, he was kind of one-dimensional, boring, um, and to my memory, it wasn't until the second book that I really started to like these books because I liked Darsana. But when I originally read them, but this one really came out and surprised me in a good way. So yeah, that's the first book complete. Next, I'm going to be reading Rule of Two, which is the second book in the Bane trilogy, and basically just goes into the first relationship between Sith Darth or Sith Lord and their apprenticeship. One well, I can't remember exactly how it's said, but one to represent the power and one to crave it, I think it is. Um, basically, really looking forward to seeing how Bane manipulates galactic events to his benefit, because Bane's ability to manipulate and use treachery as a weapon was really a highlight of the first one. So looking forward to it. Really looking forward to starting this book. I haven't started it yet. I didn't want to start it until I'd finished this part. Till I finished this video. I didn't want to like boot my memory of things out my head before I started reading this one. So yeah, so far Legends Reread by the first book off to a good start. Um, would I say it's as good as I remember it being? Path of Destruction is better than I remember it being. Significantly better than I remember it being. So, off to a good start.
Like a panther.